Welcome to the weekly philosophy chat on Hello Philo. We hear a lot about cancel culture these days. An artist, business person, or even a brand itself can be called out for what some determine to be inappropriate, unethical, or in some cases unlawful behavior. In philosophy, there are frameworks which can be applied to aesthetic judgment that might just help us make sense of when it's okay or even morally required to stop listening to your favorite singer or think a little less of a painting you once admired. If you believe in critical thinking and the power of philosophy, please like this video and subscribe for more. Let's jump right in. I'm Claire Foster, and I'm joined today by Dotan Russo.
True. That's me, Dotan Russo. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Dotan, let's start by sorting out how we should be thinking about aesthetic judgment, when or whether we should consider works of art, music, or literature less than if the art or the artist is in some way morally compromised.
Well, that's a great question, and I think maybe we should start by a short clarification about what aesthetical judgment is. And what we're referring by this is to our sometimes instinctive approach, feeling, understanding, and evaluation of things based on their aesthetic value. So to illustrate this, you're looking for a furniture, you go into a furniture store, you see a beautiful aesthetical chair. Your first instinct would be to you're feeling good about this chair because of the way it looks, and this makes it much more attractive to you. This is how we react to things instinctively. This is just the way we are wired. This is the way we are operate. Humans are being impacted very strongly by things that they consider to be beautiful, to be aesthetical. This is the first impression. And after that, sometimes on different levels, depending on the personality, on the context, there's a second layer where we actually get an understanding or being exposed to the context, to the general context. And this is where the rational activity takes becomes a little bit more dominant, where we tend to balance the two things, both the aesthetical value that we consider, and secondly, the rational thing. So just to illustrate this, again, we get entering into a room for the first time. The first feeling that we have will be very much an outcome of the aesthetical impression, right? If the room is very beautiful, very warm, very aesthetic, we'll have a very positive emotions towards this. If we're looking for a house, maybe we'll right from the beginning say to ourselves, this is exactly what we want. And on a second stage, later on, we will also observe, of course, the functionality of this room, the context of the room, and the neighborhood or whatever that would be, and try to balance between these two evaluations. So that is the first thing to acknowledge, I think, in this regard. How do we balance it? That's the big question.
Yes. Okay. So to continue on with your example with the sofa. So let's say you buy a sofa that you find to be functional and aesthetically pleasing based on your sensory observations. It looks nice, it feels nice, etc. But you find out that the sofa, for example, is produced in a country that supports child labor. So adding that layer of knowledge, does that lessen what you think about the sofa that let's say you purchased it? Does that lessen how you feel about your beautiful sofa, or does it even make, or can you keep the subjects completely separate? Can you say, listen, I don't agree with child labor, but this sofa is beautiful in my home and it is perfect for me. So there's three things. You can completely separate it. You can acknowledge that something amoral has occurred in the production of your beautiful sofa, or you could, for a third option, you could return the sofa on principle or sell it, for example, although that could be a fourth option to take money back from it. So, what would you say? I mean, this is a matter of opinion, I suppose, but thinking about those different levels of complexity.
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, of course, it's a matter of opinion. It's a personal thing, and different people react differently to this, right? Some people would give more emphasis to the moral aspect, and some wouldn't. Some would even suppress and attempt not to expose themselves to those facts. You give the example of furniture. There are many other examples, but on a philosophical level, of course, the question would be, what is the right thing? How should we address this? And I think that the first stage is to acknowledge, first of all, people that we are, as I mentioned before, wired to value aesthetical things and to give them and this is something that impact our choices and decisions very, very strongly. So being aware of this and being aware of the impact that it has on us, and then being aware of the need to also implement some degree of self reflection and self discipline by applying moral considerations as well. As a matter of fact, I think most people, in most cases, tend to prioritize the aesthetical judgment because we all purchase clothes which may be produced in places where people and employees are being abused, maybe even severely. Think about eating meat, for example. The meat industry involves with a lot of suffer to animals. Yet the vast majority of people tend to ignore that and give a preference to the taste, right? That's something that they prefer. So I think acknowledging this and then being self-reflective about this, and then try attempting to hold yourself accountable for the decisions that you're making regarding this. These are the right approaches, and different people would react differently. We all do compromises regarding this. So I would argue that it's a matter of choosing your battles.
So would you say it's morally acceptable to take a totally separatist view? So I think to your point, a lot of people would say, I they sort of they push the moral aspect, the moral story to the side and say, you know what, I just really like the sofa, or I just really like the meat, and I don't even want to let my mind go to the place of what happens to these animals. That's a sort of traditional separatist point of view or position to take. But do you think that's a morally acceptable position to take? Is
I
that
don't think it's a,
acceptable?
I don't think it's a black or white. I think it depends on the context. Let's think of this example. Adolf Hitler, for example, was a great painter, right? You can search in Google and you can find his paintings. Yet I would not be in favor of having an exhibition with his paintings because I think this is going too far regarding in separating between the individual, the artist, and the outcome, which might have a very significant aesthetical value. But there are many gray areas when this would less maybe this would be the less the right approach regarding this. People you mentioned at the beginning, the culture, the cancel culture, right? Think of Kevin
Mm.
Spacey, for example, or others, right? People, actors, performers, Michael Jackson, and so on. Um, uh, Without addressing specifically the accusations regarding them, we should also be aware of the fact that we cannot take this too far because humans are complicated initiatives, and they also involve sometimes with moral compromises, and that is something that we should accept. And to some degree, we should be willing to separate between the two, or for the very least, not to give this too much of value that would overcome the aesthetical value of the thing. So I think it is very much depends on the context, and it's also a matter again of choosing your battles because you cannot be or implement self-discipline regarding your moral choices or prioritizing your moral values in any frontier that you may be exposed to in real life. What are your thoughts on this? Where do you stand?
But where's the
Uh,
line though? Because I mean, if I agree just instinctually that Hitler's painting might be objectively capable or pleasant to look at, but is it valuable? Maybe that's not the right word, but would we qualify him as a competent artist? Would we give him credit in some way? I mean, I think the answer is no, given the moral character he was in every other aspect of his life. But where's the line to be drawn, right? So, for example, Michael Jackson is a pretty decent example of this. I think the accusations against him ultimately were never proven, but let's just say that they were. And I forget exactly how the Kevin Spacey thing ended up, but let's just say the Michael Jackson
Also, sexual
accusations were.
accusations as well from decades ago. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Which brings up several issues about we're talking about the person as well as the art that the person produces, and whether the artist is truly an agent of his work, if it sort of blends in one of the same. But where's the line to be drawn? So if you're saying that we can sort of comfortably, from a moral standpoint, separate Michael Jackson's work from what he may or may not have done who's to say that we can't separate what Hitler has done from the atrocities that we know he committed? But where's the line? Do you have to have created some specific level of destruction, or um, somehow created something much more negative than the positive that you have created through your art in order for your art not to matter? Where's that line?
Well, I think first we need to have a kind of a philosophical verdict regarding ontology and epistemology, right? In the sense that should we consider things to have objective things to have an objective value, regardless of or without any dependence on the creator or the one who actually brought them about. That is a philosophical question because one may argue that these two things are not separated and should not be separated, right? The art is and the artist are one in at least some important sense, and therefore, when you look at the art, you should also consider the artist behind it. Some would argue that no, that this is not the case. When the artists actually produce the art, they stand of their own, they have their objective existence, objective value, and therefore you can address them separately. So that is a philosophical question, philosophical verdict for each of one of us to take. Now, I think you pointed out to an important criteria because when you are actually willing or given priority to aesthetical judgment, all sort of things happens. For example, the person who was the artist in the example of Adolf Hitler is being credited for it, right? Because his name is signed there. And of course, when people would think about him, would consider him, this would become part of him as well, right? As being an artist, being a successful artist, and so on. So there's this dimension, also the practical dimensions of the real implications of separating or not separating between the art and the person behind it. And in the case of Adolf Hitler, I think it's such a radical example when one would say uh, Hitler was a pure example or role model of pure evil. This should not be addressed or combined with any other aspects of his personality. And if allowing or accepting his art to take place in such a way, such as an exhibition, we're compromising on this. While in some other areas where it is less extreme, right, and the impact is less extreme, then I think that the considerations would be different. And it's obviously very difficult to provide with a manual regarding this, practical manual. And at the end of the day, it's left to one's conscience and decision. What do you think? Do you think that, assuming Michael Jackson was convicted, should we avoid buying his record? Not that anyone is buying records these days, but assuming so.
You're dating yourself.
Yes.
Um, no, the way that I personally take it is that I uh, sit with both. I sit with both. So I appreciate his music, his art, and not only that, but also the contributions he made to Black culture. They're undisputed, and what he did for civil rights. Those things I very much appreciate, and I think that I can still celebrate Michael Jackson as a musical influence and
Why wouldn't you do the
icon.
same regarding Adolf Hitler exhibition, painting exhibition? In specific, why wouldn't you?
Um, to some degree, I think I can. I can say that I think that to be honest, I haven't seen his painting, so now I'll have to go check it out. Um, I can say that he has perhaps had talent in this area of his life. I don't think that that is diminishing the atrocities that we know he committed if he had a talent for painting.
So you would not oppose such exhibition?
An exhibit, like a formal exhibition.
Yes.
No, I would oppose that. That's different. I can have a private acknowledgement of his capability, but
So
to
why,
pub,
why, why separate or differentiate between the two? If you're willing
well,
to
because
consider and to value it as in an intimate context, right? What you're looking at it in the on Google, why would you uh,
Because when you give more power to, and I think power is a big thing, I think we should talk about that. When you give additional power to, even though he's long dead, of course, to a figure, a force that means so much more than his name or any one painting, by giving him space, by giving it airtime to discuss him, to discuss what he did, to discuss who he was, what he believed in. You're giving him additional power to promote the larger issues that the terrible things that he stands for. So in giving him space to celebrate or even acknowledge what he might have done well, you're giving the bad things that space as well. And so for those reasons, I wouldn't agree with an exhibition.
So let's take it one step further and connect this context or this topic of aesthetic judgment to real life. Would you agree that beautiful people are enjoying benefits in life that other peoples do not, and therefore they can allow themselves sometimes to compromise other aspects of their personality, even moral aspects of their personality, because they would be forgiven in a certain way because of the aesthetical judgment that aligns to them because they are beautiful people. Would you agree with this premise?
Yes, I would. I don't think that that's a philosophical debate. I think that's a cultural reality.
Or human reality? I would argue
Yeah,
that this
human reality.
in different
Both,
cultures they may
both.
have a different models of beauty, but they would react the same
Sure.
way.
Yeah.
Okay, now do you think that this is justified philosophically, or can it be justified philosophically? That just the fact that someone is beautiful and the fact that we as humans react to this in this way, right? That we give credit to this aesthetical judgment. Is it acceptable that this would be balanced with other aspects of the personality, such as moral compromise or other qualities, right?
Well, it's hard to determine if there is a philosophical debate at all because it's so ingrained in our worlds in our society that that's just a reality. So, um, is there a philosophical grounding for us to have a certain feeling or to approach a beautiful person um, and
Is there a way to a philosophical way to justify this? For example, one may
yeah,
say, well, the thing about aesthetics is that it makes us feel good. It's improving our feeling, right? That's again just the way we build. When we see something beautiful, we feel better, right?
yeah.
We are more positive towards it. Now, at the end of the day, when we try to draw on to ourselves what is important in life, many people would argue that the quality of someone's life is very much depends on how he experienced the reality around him and his feelings and so on. So, if the impact is so that it improves one's feeling, then this should be taken into consideration as well, and as a philosophical approach, right? As one that focus on quality of life or prioritizing in life, what should be prioritized. This actually should be acceptable. So if you're a head of a team in a workplace and you're about to interview 10 candidates, and one of them is very beautiful, and this means that every morning when you come to your office, you will come with more motive, and in a certain way this would have a positive impact on you, assuming so, then it is acceptable. It's legitimate. It is justified that you would give this priority even over another candidate, which may have better qualifications for the job.
Um, I know that it happens in practice, but let's say we're talking about a painting that's beautiful, that's pleasant, but that has is somehow otherwise morally compromised. It's a personal choice to prioritize the aesthetic value over the moral value, I suppose. Uh,
That's a question
we,
because I think it very much depends on the personality
I
and
think it
also
depends.
on the amount of self-discipline. Because the aesthetic judgment is very much emotional, right? And moral judgment is much more rational, and different people react differently with those different powers. In some, the one is more dominant, and in others, the second one.
I don't think you can ignore. So, for example, if you're about to hire a very attractive waitress for a job at your restaurant, and you know that she, um, I don't even want to say has committed multiple crimes because I think people are entitled to forgiveness, but in some way leads an objectionable life or has done something morally objectionable according to your value system. Though she may impact your business in a favorable way, I do not think it's moral to hire her and ignore your value system against whatever she may or may not have done. I don't think you can turn a blind eye to that. Now, is that to say that you can't hire her? I don't know. It really depends on what it is, I guess. But you can't ignore it. You can't completely separate it and not sit with both. To pretend that one thing doesn't exist is not philosophically or morally acceptable.
What about choosing a partner? This is, of course, a context and area where aesthetical judgment is very often very dominant, right? And people would choose a partner, sometimes even choose to get married with people because the aesthetical judgment is very, very strong, right? They consider them to be very beautiful, very attractive, and so on. And they will compromise on other aspects. And of course, this is something that people see all over, right? So, um, you are focusing, your main area is philosophy for children. And as we mentioned before, if in previous episodes, this is a strong way for us to articulate for ourselves where we stand. If you were to advise a teenager, not a child, a teenager regarding this, what should be prioritized? What should be the balance? Is it fair? Is it legitimate to give so much credit to the aesthetical judgment over other virtues?
Well, that's interesting because I don't necessarily agree that the majority of people pick their mate, their long-term mates based on physical
I didn't say
characteristics.
I didn't say the majority, but definitely there are some.
Some, maybe some.
Yeah.
I guess so, but that's crazy. I mean, so to me, the first point of advice would be to not consider a long-term lifetime partner for how they look, because as we know, things change over time. And we don't look like how we looked in our 20s. And that's probably the last thing on the list you should be thinking about in terms of picking a mate. But sure, of course, that's a natural thing, and it's an evolutionary thing, right? It's biological. We do select animals do select their mates based on physical characteristics, or at least show initial attraction to mates based on physical characteristics. That's true. But in terms of selecting a long-term mate, but that's of course very different than what we were originally talking about with cancel culture, because those things we can cut off, right? We can engage, we can love an artist for all the music they produce or all the artwork or all the books, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden they can say something or act in a certain way or write something further or create something further that is totally against a value system that we hold. And unlike marriage, well, you of course can end a marriage, but it's a lot easier to just stop listening to music or reading from a certain author. So I think that the examples are a bit different.
They are different, but they share something substantial in common, and that is that aesthetical judgment, right? The way that something appears to you as beautiful needs to be balanced with other aspects, other
Yes,
merits, right?
I agree.
Whether it's your partner, whether it's an employee that you need to choose, whether it's to go to this exhibition or to listen to this music. And it seems like even from the short discussion that we had, that in real life, aesthetical judgment is very dominant because, as we just mentioned, right, we're referring to so many different examples regarding this, and I think people can correlate to this, right? We talked about being vegetarian, we talked about choosing a chair, choosing a partner, all those things. So, what should we take from this about human nature? If we are honest with ourselves, to what degree aesthetic judgment is dominant in the choices that we make in life, and to what degree we are willing to compromise other aspects, such as moral aspects, because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of these examples are representative of, again, this phrase that I keep saying, which is you do what you want to do. You want to listen to Michael Jackson's music. We create a reason as to why we can, as long as we can sit alongside the things that he may or may not have done in his, it's out of the art. Another example is buying a car from a car maker that you find objectionable. These are all things that people do on a regular basis that are very relatable. And you can say, and I do as well, that the car is well made, the car is attractive, the car works for me and my family, and the I can separate the art from the artist. I can separate the material, the output from the person who created it, particularly when the artist or the maker is separate in that the output isn't intrinsically connected with the creator, right? So I actually do have a harder time with someone like Michael, like Bill Cosby, for example. Bill Cosby, I have a bit of a harder time with because Bill Cosby represented all the things that apparently he was not. And he was convicted. So we can talk about this in more certain terms. But Bill Cosby, when he was creating his show, and goodness knows I loved it too, stood for strong family values and morality and family and safe space for family and your friends and your neighbors. And certainly he was an excellent example of his show depicted, an excellent example of, or an example of what Black family life could be like or is like.
But why should we
And
assume that one should be the uh, both the conscious and the compass? Why can't someone just be the
I don't
compass without being the conscious?
Well, I think that's true. I think there's a distinction to be made. I think Bill Cosby offers a really good example of when the two are intrinsically linked because his show and what he stood for was the antithesis of what he ended up being.
As a
So,
compass, not as a self example. Why
well,
is it why is it necessary that that Bill Cosby would also implement the directions or the the that he was advocating for?
it wasn't necessary, but that's what he chose to do. That's what his show stood for. His show stood for family values. And so when you find out that he personally stood for something that was in opposition to what his show was about, then I am much more happy to cancel or rule out his influence. I mean, he had influence at the time, but now we really can't celebrate him and what he did. He made improvements again at the time, but we cannot celebrate him now as a cultural hero or an advocate of women's rights or family rights or Black families. We can't do that because he stands for the exact opposite. And he showed that in his own actions. So I think when your work gets too close to who you are, and then you show that you're not that person, I think it completely diminishes, if not erases, whatever good you've done in the past. And so we can study Bill Cosby from a historical standpoint and look at what he did at the time and how what difference he made. And he did make a difference at the time, but that is very different than celebrating him now and saying I can enjoy his show and separate what he did. I don't I could not morally do that. I can listen to Michael Jackson, although I have to say it's close because you could argue that Michael Jackson's language about global peace and unity and humanity, it's a bit more of at a macro level than the transgressions he was accused of, but it still feels inauthentic.
I think what you
So
are pointing out is that your expectation is that in this context that we're discussing is that you will exercise what you preach. And if you don't do that, right, then there's an issue, and then we should less be willing to distinguish between the outcome and the person who actually, created the outcome.
yeah,
But if we actually being consistent with this can go very far. I think about the founders of the U.S., right? They were establishing the Constitution, talking about all men are equal, while some of them had slaves, right? So they were not exercising, and of course the examples are endless, especially when we consider leaders and leading figures in different areas. So if we are consistent about this, it seems like we will need to cancel a lot, much more than just uh, this actor or that actor. Are
yeah.
you actually willing to be consistent about this? Should we take off certain images or statues of the father founders?
Well, I don't think you can make direct comparisons to, listen, I do want to be consistent. This is what we're here for. We're here to think critically about why we can apply an example to one thing and not another and defend
And
ourselves when we're being proven wrong.
also to illustrate that whatever position you take, you open the door to complexity, and it
Yes,
doesn't matter
sure.
what it is, right? Critical thinking is very much about this, about realizing that that the black and white or simple answers is very often misleading, right? The more you're
Yes.
actually being holding yourself accountable to the position that you're taking, it's becoming more hard, more difficult, more complicated. That
Yeah.
is just a fact.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I mean, contextually, if you look historically, it was legal at the time to have slaves, and I'm clearly not saying that it is correct or morally acceptable to have slaves. At the time, it was, and so to apply our modern laws, to apply our modern sense of reasonableness and humanity to a time that was very different is not logical. So, in that sense, no, I would not say that you should erase our founding fathers' faces from whatever, because the time is different. You can't compare those contexts.
Mhm. Okay, but I think that's a good and strong observation. We were emphasizing the personal impact or the personal factor of this topic, right? At the end of the day, it's a personal decision, and different people make different choices. But it is also an institutional sometimes an institutional decision as well. For example, the educational system, what to include, what not to include, right? And students are being forced to be exposed to what is being exposed to them, right? Being provided to them. So how should we address this in this context, in the institutional context? To what degree should we be willing to separate between aesthetic judgment to the individuals behind them or not?
Well, from talking about the example of education, how would you apply aesthetic value? What do you mean by that? Like
For
the
example, Wagner was a German musician, a very known one, very successful, very
Yeah,
talented.
sure. Okay, gotcha.
But he was also a great supporter of the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
So now you need to decide whether to include Wagner composers in the music curriculum. What do you do? What should you do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you clearly can't turn a blind eye despite the brilliance of his music and the musical value that he would bring to students learning his craft. I do think that he provides enough of a musical influence that it should be made his talent, I guess, his music, his artistry should not be entirely canceled, but it has to be intrinsically paired with the historical context in which it comes from which it comes. And to not do so would be morally questionable in my mind. But would I recommend canceling Wagner from a musical curriculum? I would not. What would you say?
I think you're making a very strong point in the sense that what is important is not necessarily taking one side, but rather approaching this as a context and being willing to address it as a context. So if you decide, for example, to expose the children at schools in accordance to the curriculum to Wagner music, maybe you should also give the context. Now, when we're talking about children, it would be very complicated, of course, to provide them with the context of the
Mm,
Holocaust and so on to a certain level. So maybe if you cannot do that, if you can't bring the whole context, you should avoid, or
yeah,
maybe you should leave it to later stages, let's say at grade 10 or 11 or 12, right? So the idea here is to trust people judgment, to treat people, sometimes even children, depending on the age, of course, as capable of understanding complexity, at least to a certain degree, and provide them with the context as a whole. Once you do that, you are acting, you are creating the balance that we actually started with, right? What is the right balance? It's
yeah,
not by canceling, it's not by ignoring, it's not by completely accepting, or it's by seeing the context as a whole. And I think
mm,
that is also a good point to get close to our to the closing of our conversation, because philosophy critical thinking is very much about zooming out and
hmm
seeing things in context and not as separate parts. And the argument would be that there isn't such thing as a separate part that stands by its own, right? It's all about interconnections, and interconnections are what makes the thing, the person, what it is, the art, what it is. And realizing this, addressing this, and being conscious about this is maybe the main conclusion that we should be taking from this, rather than taking this side or the other side.
yeah, yeah, I agree. So, last question. Do you think there are ever any scenarios in which it would be fair or morally defendable to cancel? for an artist or other business person or brand to be canceled?
Well, I think, first of all, in practical terms, I think the cancel culture went very, very far because sometimes, or the criteria for this to actually take place became very low, at least in some contexts. As you
Mhm.
mentioned, for example, cases where people are not being convicted. Now, of course, being convicted is a very demanding, you need to prove for the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And some people would say we have lower standards or we don't need to have such higher standards. But yet you are left with sometimes with nothing or a chaotic ground, and people can be canceled for no good reasons, right? So we should be very, very careful about this. I feel sometimes people are willing to go ahead with this very easily and without holding themselves accountable to facts and so on. So this is one aspect of it. The second aspect is that I'm not a strong supportive of cancel culture, and I think this is also maybe aligned with the last point that we were making. It's okay to listen to Michael Jackson and or to watch, I don't know, a concert or whatever, but by also keeping in mind the context, right? The overall context. It's okay to interview someone who failed morally in the past and listen to what he says, but at the same time, reminding ourselves the context. I think that counseling is a very radical approach, simplified and superficial, both philosophically and practically approach that makes it easier on us, but doesn't do necessarily justice to the matter itself.
Yeah, well said. That's a great place to end. Thank you so much for your insight, as always.
Thank you, Claire. It was a
See you next
pleasure,
time.
as always.